This video is on single sign-on. Single sign-on allows you to enter login credentials one time on a single page to access other applications. This works based upon a trust relationship that is set up between the service provider and the identity provider. This trust relationship is often based upon a certificate that is exchanged between the identity provider and the service provider. This certificate can be used to sign identity information that is being sent from identity provider to the service provider so that the service provider knows it's coming from a trusted source. In single sign-on, this identity data takes form of tokens, which contains identifying bits of information about the user like a user's email address or a username. So how does the flow look like? Well, first, a user browses to the application or website they want to access. This is what we call service provider. Then service provider sends the token that contains some information about the user like their email to the single sign-on system or so-called identity provider as part of the request to authenticate the user. Then the identity provider first checks to see whether that user has already been authenticated, in which case it will grant the user access to the service application. If the user hasn't logged in yet, they will be prompted to do so by providing credentials required by the identity provider. This could simply be a username, password, or it might include some other authentication. Or it might include some other form of authentication like one-time password. Once the identity provider validates the credentials provided, it will send a token back to the service provider confirming a successful authentication. This token is then passed through a user's browser to the service provider. The token that is received by the service provider is validated according to the trust relationship that was set up between the service provider and the identity provider during the initial configuration, and the user is granted access to the service provider. When the user tries to access different websites or applications, it needs to have that similar trust relationship configured with the single sign-on solution, otherwise it's not going to work. Single sign-on is great because it usually has stronger passwords and there's no repeated passwords, and it has better password policy enforcement, it has multi-factor authentication, and it is a single point for enforcing password re-entry, it has internal credential management instead of external storage, and less time wasted on password recovery.